Welcome back to New Money. You just joined us. We're talking investments this evening. My guest is David Shapiro. If you'd like to email us, you can send your inquiry to www.bhca. David, look, we understand that some companies have recovered, other companies have done well, and maybe the Magnificent Seven last year haven't fully recovered. Now, from your point of view, does that mean you're going to maybe have a different view from a top-down approach and maybe change the sector, move out of sectors into different sectors?
No, I remain where we are. It was, first of all, the results that came out from the big tech companies were really superb, really good. I know sometimes analysts have lofty expectations which are almost impossible to meet, but you've got to understand you're in an uncertain world, uncertain economy. But Jensen Huang, who's the CEO of NVIDIA, the semiconductor company, which is the third largest business in the US at the moment, made a very important speech at a conference where Trump had business people there as well. And I think he's changed the whole shift of how people are thinking. He said America, and I'm putting this into my own words, America doesn't make Levi jeans. It doesn't make sneakers. They're not good at that, and nor will they ever have the facilities to do that. That's best left to other areas, especially in Asia, who are very good manufacturers. Where America is great is in technology. In other words, where they are at the moment, in data centers which provide not only the data, but also provides the technology for businesses to use data in order to position their businesses, improve productivity, improve efficiencies. And that helps businesses. So I think this is where America goes, and this is where America will be great, is in continuing to develop its technology. And it's still the leader there. There's no one to match them at the moment. Yes, the Chinese are coming up, but I think at the moment America still leads. So they're going to, and I think Jensen Huang has also changed attitudes towards that as well. And so that's where we must manufacture on automation. Now, the other thing is, Bryan, if they do bring back factories to America, they're not going to be labor intensive. They will be automated.
Yeah.
And that's the point. For those automation, you need the data centers. You need the electricity. If you're setting up a data center, you need the electricity and the power to drive those data centers. So I think that's the shift. And I still believe that that's where the growth is going to come. Not in making Levi jeans or bicycles or things like that.
Okay, so let's move on to South Africa at the moment. We had enormous rand weakness. Now, I've always understood the rand will appreciate based on our inflation rates, GDP, emerging markets, and South African politics. We have the rand move so strongly to near, and I thought it was going to break 20. It was 1992, I thought it was going to break 20. It's recovered within 1820. That's an enormous recovery. It appears that maybe the government of national unity is not going to break up. But David, does that make sense?
It's got nothing to do with that. It's got to do with dollar weakness. Because if you look at the dollar against the euro, people are moving out because of Trump's politics, because of his economic policies. There's a lot of fear outside of America. Those people who held US assets are now switching those US assets to other assets. Are they doing the right thing? I don't think so. In my view. So they're switching into the euro, they're switching into gold, they're switching into Bitcoin, they're switching into anything else. There's also always the worry, as we've seen in the past, that America, you're too attached to America, you're too, you want to make that, you want to break away from holding their assets, so you start to look for other assets. That's why the rand has improved. It's improved with the weakness that we've seen in the dollar.
But it's also improved against the pound and the euro.
Very slightly. Marginally in those. In fact, I think it might, net, it might even be weak. I haven't done the calculation as well. My view is I wouldn't take a risk against the dollar. I wouldn't bet against the dollar. It's still it's weakened a bit, and that's been a 10-year cycle. But I still think that America stands out as still the most powerful economy versus Europe, versus the UK, versus China, versus anywhere else. That will come as soon as we get some coherency in what Trump is trying to achieve, if there ever is that word that we can attach to him. I don't know. I don't think that's an oxymoron, coherency and Trump.
David, you've always spoken about price earnings ratios.
Yeah.
Have price earnings ratios on those more expensive policies come down to more realistic levels?
Much more realistic. I still think I'm very bullish on them. Bryan, you get in a train in New York, and I always watch what kids are doing. They're not chewing chewing gum or drinking Cokes. They're all on TikTok, or on Reels, or they're looking at their phones. It's so closely attached to what they do. And I think technology is just such an important part of our lives. We're using technology now in the way that we transmit this program. We use it all the time when we talk on Teams or on Zoom. Microsoft, Google, whatever it is, AI, all of that is what dominates our world at the moment. So I can't move away from, I still think that's going to maintain importance rather than going down to lower levels of consumption.
Okay, Dave, let's talk about the big word.
Yes.
Recession.
Yes.
Stagflation.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this question. We had a first quarter of negative GDP negative, which means if we have a second quarter of GDP negative, we're in what is considered to be a recession. I always say, hold on, if you're showing 0.1% growth in 2 quarters or 0.1% negative, does it really make big difference to anything happening?
No.
But is it likely we're going to have negative growth? And how will the world feel?
Yeah.
Yes, how will the world feel if we hear at the end of June, come July, that America's in recession?
Yeah. I don't think it makes a big difference, as you've said.
No, it doesn't make a big difference if you analyze the numbers. But remember, markets are not driven by fundamentals, they're driven by sentiment.
I think the chances are a lot lower than they were, maybe 30%. And as you say, it's very technical. But where you're right is that things are slowing down in the US. There's no doubt. And a lot of it is created by the chaos. That's why Trump is putting pressure on the Fed. And the Fed should be at a stage where it's being concerned about employment, concerned about inflation, concerned about spending and growth. But no one knows what the consequences of Trump's policies are, and that's why there's a delay. Bryan, we're going to get the next part of this market move is going to be in the second half when Powell starts to reduce rates, which he will do. And the forecasts are for up to 1.5%, 50 basis points, 3 times 50 basis points. That's going to happen, which is going to give the market a stimulus. But at the moment, there's still a standoff between Powell and between Trump and trying to understand where this is all going to end.
David, I always like to try and deal with some of the emails on this program, but I think we want to deal with more of the things. I want to talk about the case for, because South African Rand in 1820, 1825, I had people, when the Rand was 1980, wanted to take money out. Now at 1825, everyone thinks it's going back to 16. So the question is, what are the reasons of investing offshore? So maybe I could just put up slide 1, which talks about unemployment. So maybe my studio could just put up that slide. So David, this is the employment rates. It shows South African employment rates, and that's what the graph shows, and it may not be true, 33.5% unemployed. It talks about Japan, Mexico, Russia, and Germany, which shows below 4% growth. Unemployment. It shows the US and UK at 4% and China at 5%. So my first point is, where have consumers got money? South Africa or globally? That's the first thing. I'm going to just put a pin in that. If I could bring up my second slide. The second slide shows the world markets. I think it's 123 trillion in the markets. And it shows, because maybe you can't read that, but let me get to my thing. It shows that in the US, global markets, 20% is in IT, 17% in financials, 11% discretionary, 9% healthcare, and 8% communication. So I'm saying, where consumers got money, where they're going to spend. South Africa, they don't have money. And 2, if you're going to invest in markets, what in markets are you going to invest in? How many of our South African companies actually fit into these categories?
We're an old economy, and that's the problem. The reason our market is up is not because of SA Inc. The reason is that, and you've put this chart up a number of times when I've been here, probably 70 to 80% of the JSE earns its money in dollars offshore. So it's not really a South African market. When we go down to SA Inc., there's a lot of pressure on the banks, a lot of pressure on the consumer companies. So you haven't made money in those areas. Where you made money, rightfully you said in gold, and the others have been in offshore businesses like, I see AB InBev and British American Tobacco, Naspers, Process. All of those businesses have lifted our index. They've lifted the index as well. And that's where we've got the growth. And what's happening is that there has been money shifting into the European markets, which have given those markets a bit of a lift. And you've also had the other part is the depreciation of the dollar or the increase in the euro. So that's where our markets, not through South Africa. The point you made about unemployment is very important, because what's happening is that government is forced to look after that 33%, those unemployed. We have to take whatever we earn and look after those people in social services, in social security, in grants. So there's no money left to reinvest in the economy.
Yeah.
That's a tragedy of South Africa. We haven't got money to reinvest in growing our economy.
And at the rands at these levels, quick one, because I've got to do closings. Happy to invest, take money offshore.
Oh yes.
And also
in those areas,
yeah.
I'm still a big freak. I told you why. Yeah. In technology, I still think there's plenty of opportunity in those companies, even though they're not, even though they haven't quite recovered what they've lost this year.
Well, most investors are feeling confused, as most financial programs, radio reports and publications tend to focus on global negatives and the potential impact on our markets. However, long-term investing in quality companies is not your enemy. The real challenges investing are: 1, beating inflation, and 2, ensuring that your money lasts, especially as people are living that much longer. Many investors also believe that as they age, they must shift to a more conservative investment strategy. But before doing so, you need to answer 2 questions. Are you primarily concerned about future income, or is it your capital ultimately intended to be passed on to your children? If your priority is income, then it may be time to reassess your growth strategy. But if you have sufficient income and your capital will be inherited by your children, then staying invested for long-term growth remains essential. I'd be very interested to hear your thoughts. Feel free to send me a message via www.bhca.co.za. David, great to have you on the program. It's important to note that our program tonight is to provide information and should not be construed as advice. Next week's program, we'll be dealing with estate planning, and if you need to get hold of me, my details will appear on the screen. I'd like to thank you for watching, and good night.